hello, welcome to episode 37 of the One Life Church podcast, where we talk about things from One Life Church, but just ultimately things we think could relate to you and your one and only life. My name is Sarah, and I am joined by my friend, co-host, and our lead pastor, Brett Nicholson.
Look, listen to all those titles.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Nice.
You know, I noticed with 37 episodes, I've noticed with other podcasts, they're in those numbers as well. So we're kind of in that
We're
zone.
moved into podcast.
I remember the days
realm.
when it was like 3 and it felt very illegitimate. Like, yeah, you haven't done anything yet, but now we're in the zone where we're doing stuff.
We didn't even have mic arms then. It was just
I know.
like,
That's right. Our humble
random
beginnings.
things from downstairs. So yeah, it's been pretty fun. And we are currently in a series here at One Life called Common Chaos. And it's been really, really great and interesting talking about these things that we're calling just common chaos, things that we all kind of wrestle with, kind of go through as people. And so we're focusing on 3 topics for that: relationships, addictions, and stress, anxiety, busyness, whatever word you want to put in there. And so we're really excited today to talk to 2 of our friends here and just kind of explore some of those things together. And so today on the podcast, we have Courtney Tenbarge. Did I say that wrong?
I think it was more of a P than a P the first time, but
And I've known you for a while, so I apologize.
the number in the book.
Courtney Tenbarge and Jill Buck, and they are mental health counselors from here in the area. And just want to start out just kind of letting you guys tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of go from there. So I'm going to start with Courtney and tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Courtney. I'm actually a one-lifer.
Yeah.
I've been here since I've been back in Indiana. But I do mental health counseling. Jill and I met 7 or 8 years ago. I forget the timeline at this point.
A while.
A good while.
Yeah.
So more about myself professionally is just that I'm a counselor that works with all ages. I work with about 5 or 6 is about the youngest I work with through any age that walks through the door. I call my little bitties through my big bitties is the ages that I work with. And really, Jill and I specialize in trauma. We have a trauma background. We come from a place where we did a lot of extensive trauma training, and I think it's really opened our eyes up to the human experience. And I know we'll talk about connection and those things. There's a lot of misconnection that is involved with trauma, and so that's kind of the work that we do.
What's something fun you like to do?
I like to cycle.
Yeah.
And this is new to me in the last maybe 3 years. I have a road bike, and I like to ride my bike out in bluegrass. I shouldn't even say this out loud yet, but I haven't fallen yet with my clip-ins.
Fallen yet? Okay.
By the time this episode airs,
I shouldn't have spoken it. I shouldn't even have spoken it aloud.
Yeah, that's right. Just let it go.
And I think, you said you're one lifer, and Courtney and I actually met working with students
Yes.
together. And just a short story, actually just saw this a few weeks ago. A lot of the students that she worked with were in high school at the time and have now moved on to college. And I saw one who just graduated, and she came in, and you guys just immediately met in the lobby, just a great big hug. And I know that's really cool, seeing that relationship didn't just stop there, that you guys have always stayed connected. So it's really cool.
Yeah, one of mine just posted her picture of college graduation this past week. I was like, what? You didn't? I would have been there. She's like, I know. I thought of you that day. She's like, I cannot believe I didn't tell you because I knew you would have been there. I was like, I'm not old, but I feel old. Like these freshmen are now graduating, and some of them already have jobs. And
So cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it's cool relationships. And Jill, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. So like Courtney said, we started 7 years ago, but we opened our own private practice this year in September. We're Joy for the Journey Counseling. That's our place, and we're in Newburgh. I see starting at age 3. So I start with a little bit younger kids. And then I work up with young adults, and as I get older, like my young adults keep getting older too. So they just kind of they age into it. So, we just keep coming together. But I do see a lot of trauma. I specialize in sexual abuse. That's something that I focus on in treatment. And we'll probably talk about EMDR some too, but we're both trained in some trauma protocol called EMDR. And we do a lot of that, I feel like, and play therapy kind of things too. We're both trained in attachment work. I don't know if you want to we can talk about attachment, I guess, as we go too. But a little bit about me. I did not go to One Life, but I've gone to Salem Church of Darmstadt my whole life. So we're generational there. And I did a lot of church camps for a lot of years when I was a kid. Then I went to, counsel at the church camps. And so I'm definitely a person of the faith and have been, like I said, at my church for a long, long, long time. So
that's cool. So you were there and then you came back and did more things as you continued on. That's cool.
Yeah.
And then, well, you just said something that I don't even know what it is. What is EMDR?
You want to talk about it?
It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yeah.
It's a form of trauma.
That helps.
I know, right?
Yeah. All right, got it.
Well, the way I say it to kids is eyes move to digest and reprocess, which they still don't get the reprocess. But
So, yeah. Well, I don't know if you know this, but in one of your sleep cycles is called REM sleep, rapid eye movement.
That part, yeah.
And we do a lot of processing in our sleep. And the lady Francine Shapiro created this, and it involves eye movement while you're awake. And what I tell people basically is we're just getting both parts of the brain, both hemispheres of the brain activated, because trauma tends to be stored primarily in certain parts of the brain, and other parts, if we look at brain scans, are super activated, while other parts we want to be activated are super shut down. And so the goal is just to get all parts of the brain activated through what we call bilateral stimulation. So bilateral being both sides of the body stimulation. So it's a really fancy language for we just process trauma through movement.
Wow.
Process trauma through movement, but eye movement.
Eye or tapping. It can be like some people like their eyes closed, so we may do some tapping. I've had people stand up and march while we process in trauma.
kids will do like a car back and forth or a marble sometimes to just.
Okay, is that good practice to have? Just even if you don't feel like you've had trauma, you just to do.
Well, you don't want to do it on your own.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't.
Well, but actually, there's part of it you can. We teach kids something called a butterfly hug, and you just make a little butterfly over your heart, and it's just slow, calming. I actually do it as an adult.
Okay.
I tell them, I'm like, grown-ups can do this too. Right. It just gets bilateral again, both sides stimulation.
Okay. We're already learning things.
Right?
We probably need to back up.
Sorry. Let's jump in. And
Sorry, I was so fascinated by that.
No, it was a great
acronym.
thing to ask. And I love it. But now you say you work a lot with trauma. Define for it. When you say that word, what do you mean? What's the definition of that?
So for me, it can be, we call them big T traumas and little T traumas. So for kids, sometimes it might seem like a small T trauma, like they moved schools or, they, like a friend moved away. Those kinds of things might seem little to us, but it might have been big to them. Other traumas can be like car accident, sexual abuse, growing up in a verbally abusive home, things like that. I don't know if you have things to add when you're thinking about trauma.
Yeah. I think you said a car accident, natural disasters. The little T traumas I think about too, like bullying, something small over like a period of time can really be those messages we talk about of I'm not enough or whatever can then bring on those beliefs, those negative beliefs that then get held or stored in the body or in the brain. But trauma, the more we practice trauma and learn about trauma, the more we realize how prevalent it is. I think before I got into this field, I thought, oh, that's just big extreme stuff. But one of my favorite trainings was it's not all big T trauma. There's little T traumas too.
Yeah, a comment was made before we started that everybody has trauma to some degree.
Yeah, it's kind of the bumps in the road in your life. Like when you think back and think of the things that maybe didn't go so well or that were hard for you or even things like I can remember being a kid and one of my, like a friend said something, something small to me, like you can't sing. I remember one of my friends said that, and I can sing, but I just like this much.
I can.
This much. Okay. Not really, but I can carry a tune.
Sure. Okay.
But I remember that became like a belief. Like, okay, well then I can't sing, so therefore I should not sing. So it's those little things, and I don't know that's necessarily like a traumatic event, but it's just something that that became a belief about me that was never true or founded on anything. But as a kid, I just like that's the truth, and so I went with it. But I think things like that can come up. So do you
draw out the definition to that which the cause of an effect, which the effect is the belief? Is it? Do you say it that way? Do you say this happened, so therefore I believe something to get something defined as trauma?
Oftentimes we really try to find the belief because there tends to be something. But I mean, it can also be body reactions. It can be somebody that now is having panic attacks or was very avoidant of certain places. But again, generally, if we kind of get to digging, there's a belief of I'm unsafe or something that is the core.
I can't trust people.
I can't trust the world is, there tends to be a core belief we can usually get to, but it manifests in different ways. Like I said, body sensations or relational, the way people relate with each other and all that stuff.
Okay. So, but the experience of trauma can be traced back to, or the experience of that belief can be traced back to something traumatic that you can you can say it came from this particular thing or this series of events or something.
And even if it didn't, like my friend telling me I couldn't sing, that wasn't necessarily traumatic. It did trace back to that though. Do you see what I mean? Like, I don't know if I would call that traumatic,
trauma.
but it would relate back to something.
It had impact on you in some way. And when you guys are talking about like trauma and some of these things that you mentioned as examples, I don't know, maybe we just have more information than we've had in the past. Do you feel like that's more prevalent like in society today? Like this idea of trauma, that we're at least realizing that it is trauma? Yes. Or is that something that we just have always had?
I mean, it's always been there, but the belief is finally, I think very recently, maybe in the last 30 years, finally we're starting to realize these things are traumatic events or I think the idea around it is definitely changing. The idea of it being present is not new by any means. But we have just such a better understanding about it. I mean, not that long ago, women were put in the hospital for hysteria or catatonic states for things that are much more treatable now, just because we know the world differently and the brain differently. And
Right. So if you, is that what most of what you deal with is? Like, and I know that's what you specialize in, but when people arrive in your world, is it usually you can trace it back to trauma?
A lot of what we get is adjustment, whether it be life changes, relationship changes, moves, someone passed away or died. A lot of what we get is adjustment, which then can result with anxiety, depression,
behavioral issues,
with
kids and adults too, I guess.
But then you use the word adjustment. That's a different thing from trauma. I'm sorry, I missed her definition.
Not necessarily. So, in fact, the adjustment disorder falls under the trauma section of our diagnostic manual. It basically, and here's the deal: not everybody has an issue with adjusting. It just depends on how it happened, what was going on, how vulnerable you were at that time, all of those kinds of things. But they're very, very interconnected. It can be the trauma can be somebody now is maybe they don't have post-traumatic stress disorder, but they definitely have an adjustment issue after this car accident or after this death or whatever that may be.
Right. Okay. So if as mental health professionals, what do you wish everybody knew that you could just kind of put out there as just broadcast? What do you wish everybody knew to
so many things
about
Jill's
so many
excited
things?
Right now,
but you've got to do it in about a 20-minute frame. But just about how life functions and whether it's trauma issues or adjustment issues, what do you that would help everybody be just a little bit healthier anyway, mentally, and would chill out or however you want to call that.
Yeah. There's so many things that are just like swirling around in my head. But I know one of the big things that I am all about is connection is key. So, when I talk with parents about disciplining their kids, connecting with them first before you actually carry on whatever discipline it might be, but just making sure, what I'm talking about there is like a kid's throwing a fit. And so instead of saying, just removing them from the situation, talking to them first, like I can tell you're upset. Your face is showing me that you're angry. So then connecting with them and then helping that child kind of move out of whatever's going on in that moment. So connection is key is always one thing I want people to know. And then I think too that mental health is something that everyone has. So it's normal to have times when your mental health is better and times when it's not. So what are things you're thinking about?
I mean, the first thing that I tell almost at least 5 times a day is there are things I can do to help myself. Is what I want everybody to know. There are always things I can do to help I talk with kids about that. We have our power poses and we say, there are things I can do to help myself, because I think it's really easy to forget that. Primarily within relationship, kind of what Joe was talking about, connection. So
when you're saying that, she used the example of connecting to kids when you're raising them, but when for adult to adult, like if when you say connection, I need to make better friends or
healthy friendships. And everybody's different. Some people 3 friends, 2 friends is enough. Some people they like to have a bigger network than that. But some kind of support or network of connection. One of the words that anyone who's sat in my office or knows me well, I say the word regulation a lot. We want to regulate, and a lot of life is co-regulation. Like we feed off of each other. There are times, like we know babies need almost pure co-regulation. They can't calm themselves. So we start at life like needing so much regulation from another person. And then we slowly begin to develop that, but we never lose it. If you have a bad day, you need somebody to talk to. We get that regulation from someone else because we're in a heightened emotional state. and we match as people. Someone can kind of bring us to their state. Or we can bring someone up to our state, depending on what's going on.
That's right. I've seen that happen a time or two.
It's a roller coaster,
sure.
yeah.
But yeah, there are things we can do to help ourselves, and that connection, I think, is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so relationships in general, you've talked just a little bit about that there. And like what role, I mean, overall, like healthy relationships, but like parent to child, spouse, friends, like what does that play? Like how does that play kind of into our mental health in general? Like we've been talking about relationships here at One Life a lot, and as a proactive pursuit, I mean, it's something you're kind of always working through. And what is that? I don't know. How's that look like for you guys when you're talking people through things?
There's so many things in the recent message that we connected with. The proactive pursuit, listen, there was something you said this past week of try to be interested before being interesting. Especially in my adult relationships, when I'm talking with someone maybe about their partner relationship or with a parent or a sibling, try to see where the other person is coming from. With relationship, that being so key, we are so quick to assume.
Yeah.
I call it projecting. We project on other people all the time. Like I'm going to project onto you what I think I already know you believe about me, and it tends to be wrong because I'm projecting from my emotional state within that. But I think I don't even remember now what you even asked about the relationship piece, but I think I get so excited about this. I just get going.
There's a lot of joke fodder within that little comment you just made. I don't even remember what you just said.
You weren't listening.
That's right.
I know her relationship, and I was like,
it's open.
Dang it.
For it.
I did hear a lot of things that you said, Brett. She said she liked the stuff you said on Sunday. So
I wrote a lot of stuff down.
And I stopped listening after that. It's just like, oh, way to go. It's good.
Yeah.
That's right. Check it off. It's good. Yeah. So, and we had a little bit of a conversation before we started this, and you mentioned just knowledge and understanding of the brain, which is one of the things that I've had a blast. I've always liked the neuroscience kind of stuff. I read it on a pop level. I don't read, the papers you had to go through in college or any of that sort of stuff. That looks pretty dry. But I do know they've learned a whole lot in the last several years compared to in the past. But what do you wish people knew about the brain itself? This is what God has given us, and so it functions a certain way. And I have a feeling that if we did understand how it functioned, we'd be a little bit better off.
Yeah, it can do a lot of healing on its own, the brain. So I feel like you're a brain expert. Do you want to talk about it?
What do you mean to tell you?
I thought you both were brain experts.
I feel like she explains it. Like I feel like she explains it more thoroughly or more precisely than I do. I get it all.
So like how I teach people about their brain?
Yeah.
Well, just what you wish people knew about their brain that most people probably don't. And they just, I got one, at least. And what do you wish they knew about it, how it functions, and how I could help it function better?
I think the easiest skill we can come back to if we want to get super basic is there are simple parts of the brain that I teach people. And I know if people are going to watch this, I'm going to just do it. But if you make a fist with your hand, this is about the basic shape, not size, of our brain.
I'm doing this too.
Yeah, please do. So if you are just listening, it's a fist with your thumb tucked inside your hand. And so basically this is our brain. These are our most recently developed, our more critical thinking areas of our top part of our brain. And inside we have more of our emotion brain. And so what I teach people is when we are usually when I'm talking to somebody in my office, I say, right now you're feeling pretty calm, right? And yeah, I feel calm. So I'm like, well, all parts of your brain are online. All parts of your brain are with us right now. And so we're able to problem solve and think through things. And so that's our thinking part of our brain. That's kind of right behind our forehead is where we make a lot of our good decisions. Inside of our brain, we have our emotion brain. I teach kids, her name is Amy. It's our amygdala. We have Amy. Tex is our thinker, our cortex, and hippo is our hippocampus. That's our memory parts of our brain. And when they're all together, we can make good decisions, but we can be aware of our emotions. Our emotions are important. What happens is, and I think what is really helpful to know is when we get really heightened emotion state, we flip our lid. And so
that was worth watching, right?
And so our thinking brain kind of goes offline. We're coming out of emotion. So that's when we tend to emotionally rationalize. That's when maybe a toddler's on the floor tantruming. And what I tend to see as adults, we try to do is then reason with them or logic we can't do that here. Hey, we need to go. And we're trying to speak to the logic brain, which is no longer in the room.
Oh, wow.
So we have to connect. Oh my goodness, you're so upset. I'm right here with you. Let's take a big belly breath together. And you'll slowly see somebody come back online. And then we can think, then we can make good decisions, or then we can talk to that person that we're upset with. But if we can realize what kind of part of brain we're in, then I think we know what we need. I either need to calm myself down. I don't need to continue this argument with my partner. I don't need to address this with my child because I'm really mad at them. I don't need to call my friend right now because I'm in my emotion brain. I have flipped my lid, or maybe I'm halfway flipped, but I'm not going to say nice things or whatever. And that's when I'm like, okay, if we know we're here and we are really taken over by emotion, we know what we need. We need to calm down first until most of us are all together. Then we can talk through stuff. Then we can know what we can do. And I even, even for us, not even with somebody, just for myself, when I know I need that, I start thinking like irrational thoughts about something that I know aren't true. I'm like, well, I'm not going to pay any attention to those thoughts until I can calm myself down, because I know I'm in my emotion brain right now. So let's wait until my thinking brain can get back online. So I'm just gonna take a breath, or I'm gonna walk, or I'm gonna squeeze my stress ball or something like that.
So when you're on your own and there's no one to connect with directly to calm yourself down, review that again. Just what do I do if I'm thinking with my emotional brain? You said squeeze your stress ball.
Yeah, I have a stress ball in my office. Sometimes I'll just walk if I need to. If I'm at home, I like to turn on music and dance around the house. Like that just gets me in a better mood and relaxed.
Well, it's been given permission to do that by our counselor.
Yes,
So we just need to dance. It'll all be good.
Honestly, music is probably one of the most popular relaxation or coping skills I hear from people.
Especially teens. Well, most people, but teens, they always have access to that.
Yeah.
Too, so
When you feel you see that in media, even like when like teenagers see even shows like that with their headphones on, go in their room, like you've seen that since, movies since I can remember. I mean, it's interesting.
But even just knowing that that's not just, hey, I like to listen to music when I'm stressed, but that actually is functioning. It's doing something for you, that having the permission to do that is as a calming thing is helpful.
Yeah.
So when you're on your own, you do that. But and you said something a while ago that the connection piece, when Jill, you said that connection was so important.
Yeah.
You kind of linked it to connection is key. When I am I'm kind of torqued up. That is the thing that I need at that moment, and I'm asking.
For kids, I would say yes. I don't know. What would you say for adults?
A lot of times, but I think we all know sometimes we just want to be alone and we need space. So I think it can be both, but I think connection is definitely one of the big key things. Even if it just means somebody says, this is really hard, or I'm just going to sit with you, or it's okay to be mad at me right now. I say that a lot. Like, it's okay to be mad right now, even if it's at me. You are totally allowed that. I think that feels so good to hear. It's just knowing like, no feelings are bad. We have to validate all of them. And it's hard to validate ourselves sometimes, especially when we're in that emotional state. If we can be validated by somebody, and validating does not mean agreeing. To tell someone, I could see why that would be upsetting for you, doesn't mean you don't think that that's not an upsetting situation or whatever.
Or sitting and saying something that you think if you say it out loud, people are going to either not like you or think differently of you. And you say it to someone, they're like, okay. And then you just move forward like, oh, you're not freaked out. And like, it just makes you feel more confident and settle with it a little bit. I can see that, like coming back together in one piece there.
Yeah, important distinction though. Validating is not agreeing.
Right.
Okay, so validating you're defining as, I understand why that would make you mad.
Yes.
Well, like teens or anybody venting about their parents or whoever. I could see why that would frustrate you. I could see that that's a big deal to you. Or, things like that where it's you don't necessarily agree with their perspective, but you can just validate. Yeah.
Right. And Jill, since you deal with the kids side of life, what do you wish parents knew about some of the things that you've known as you went through all your training and dealing with kids every single day? Yeah. What do you wish most of them knew about? Because it's hard. I mean, I'm a parent of three. Parenting is the most wonderful thing ever, but at the same time, it is absolutely the toughest job there is.
Yes.
Because navigating some of that stuff is, and you really don't have a lot of guidance out there. You make it up as you go along. So what can you pass along some guys?
Well, I always tell anybody, but parents especially, that parenting is the highest of highs and the lowest of lows usually through life, just because parenting is a stressful job. And self-disclosure, I have an almost 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I'm parenting all the time now.
OTJ, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So that's, they teach me a lot. Both of my kids have taught me a lot. And just have, understanding parents a little bit better too, of just like, it's stressful. It's a stressful job. I think a lot of parents think that their kids are, they're being bad, or they're, I don't really know how to say what I'm trying to say, but they attribute their behavior to like, oh, they're just being stinkers. They're just stinkers. They just write them off as like, they're always going to be bad, misbehaved, do things like that. And it's like, well, that might not really be true. They just need something. They're communicating something with their behavior. So if they're throwing a fit, what's behind that? What are they needing? Are they needing to spend more time with you? Do they feel disconnected from you? So kind of using behavior as a communication method almost, because kids tend to not use their words when they should, unless you're my children and they talk all the time, nonstop. But I think that piece of just, going back to connection, but what are they communicating with you by the way that they're acting? Or, with teens, you'll even see like they're not wanting to look at you or things like that. And it's, what is that communicating to you? And,
but what if, they're obviously upset because they wanted to do X and you said you're not doing X, you're coming over here and doing Y.
Yeah. And you just stick with that. I'm sorry. I know you're upset about that. That's just, we got to do this. I tell my oldest daughter every day, I know it's not fair because, sister's doing something. Yeah, I know it's not fair, but that's the way that it is. When you were 2, you did all those things. Whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right.
They're just like,
we used to get that out of you.
It's not fair. You can be upset about it. Like,
now,
just kind of validating that.
You deal with teens, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, hey, there's a great little, what do you wish all parents knew about dealing with teenagers? Because that's, especially now it divides up. And my experience was, and Sarah, and you've led groups of teenagers, and like there's the middle school years, kind of in pre-adolescent, early adolescent years, and then there's the later, and they are different.
Yes.
So early adolescence, what's critical to understand if you're a parent trying to navigate those?
They're all about
things.
peer relationships in that age group. So like, I feel like even like thinking back in my own middle school years, you could say something as a parent 100 times, but if they hear it from one of their friends, it's like brand new news, like it's brilliant, brilliant advice. So just keeping that in mind, that they're driven by social status and by peer relationships. So, you'll see a lot of that in their way that they're acting or the way that they're wanting, even maybe the way that they talk. So I don't know. Do you have other things?
Yeah, I would definitely say developmentally middle school is all. That's why we see peer pressure and bullying and self-esteem issues really coming up in middle school, because it is all developmentally. They're supposed to be now saying, "Where's my social status in the world?" And that's why I think we get some of that irritability and some of those things that definitely carries into high school years, where they're seeking more independence with that too, and they have social causes and those kinds of beliefs. One of the biggest things I hear with these ages is that grown-ups don't take the time to validate a teen or middle schooler. They don't feel heard. Right. Whether you agree with your kid or not, to sit down and say, I see that's really important for you. Here's the boundary I have with that, but let's either talk about why, or let's talk about a compromise here, or let me just understand why you're so passionate about that. I tell parents that doesn't mean we have to not have the boundaries or the beliefs or the rules and regulations in the house that you believe as a parent you should have. But that is the biggest key piece I hear most often, is that my parents don't listen to me, don't care about my perspective, or they think I am not stupid. I'm not, I know more than they think. I can do these things. And if we saw that in them and spoke into that while still saying, you absolutely can, and I hear where you're coming from, and here's how I see this boundary. And again, at the end of the day, parents still have that and say, but that validating them.
Okay. Well,
I think explaining the why behind, I tell parents a lot that. So a kid will give me an issue, like they're worried about something, or they disagree with their parents about whatever issue it is. And then I'll say, well, why do you think that it is the way that the parent is saying that? And the kids usually don't know. So then I'll ask the parents, well, why have you made this the rule? And once I understand the why, I said, have you told your child that? They'll say, well, no, things like that. I'm like, well, if they understand the why behind, they're more likely to respect that, I think, than if they just were given a rule, like you have to be in bed by 11 or whatever, whatever the rule is. Well, that's kind of late. You have to be in bed by 9, things like that, but if they don't ever say because your brain's developing and it's really important for you to get good sleep, that's I don't know if that's the greatest example, but it's an example.
It's an example. Yeah.
So things like that, where explaining the why behind might help a child understand that reason, why there is something the way that it is, why the rule is the way that it is. So. And
as the gear shifts over into, say, 16 and up,
yeah,
where does that come in? You said a lot of it is just the independence issue. I mean, are there things around that? Is it still validation pretty much?
Yeah, I think definitely validation at that age. And then the relationship. And also just accepting that your kid is going to be mad at you about a lot of the decisions that you make, and just telling your kid, like, honestly, instead of like, don't roll your eyes at me, I think a better response can be, can feel disrespectful, is, I know this is really frustrating for you and I get it. I get that when I have to set that limit, you don't like it. Because what's your end goal? Is your end goal in that moment to just have your rule and that be end? Or is your end goal for your kid to kind of feel, I'm on the same side as you about this as much as possible? You're never going to get that 100% of the time. But I'm always thinking, what's the end goal here? Do I want them to know the why of why that is? And I get it. You get to be mad at me and I'm going to have that, but I'll still be here. I'm not
still the parent.
And you're teaching them. Yeah. You're teaching them. Like, a lot of times we get sassy, back with a kid when we're saying, don't get sassy at me. And it's just teaching them, like, this is how you stay calm when somebody is being that way. And they pick up about 20% of what we say and about 80% of what we do. Like, if we're yelling at them,
right.
Those kinds of things.
Very true.
That's good. And even going into adulthood, when you said, it's all about peer relationships, I feel like that still happens, obviously, in adulthood. I mean, you kind of, once you start that in those teenage years, it doesn't ever really stop, in a way. Would that be true?
Absolutely. It just gets harder. Yeah. The older you get to find friends, especially if you're new to an area or those kinds of things. But no, I definitely work with adults 30, 40, 50 that are either new to an area or just really, because of raising kids and those things, don't have a lot of friends, and they're wanting that connection and not sure how. So no, I don't think that ever goes away.
Yeah. And do you feel like kind of starting at that young age, when it kind of starts, if you're healthier there, it helps, I mean, obviously throughout, I would assume. So kind of starting on figuring out what that looks like, having healthy relationships. Because it's like, as we're talking about this, I'm like, wow, that makes so much sense, because you continue to see that with adults so often, especially if people are looking for connection, which even in a church, we see that a lot. People are looking for someone or some place to connect to, just looking for a way to figure that out. And I think that's a lot of times what a lot of people are just looking for.
Yeah, and we build our relationship skills, our social skills from a very young age. We really parents are the first teachers of social skills and how relationships work with their kids. And then obviously school and peers and all of those kinds of things. But confidence in relationships, feeling open to going to, there's a lot of people that don't want to go to a social function because that's scary.
Yeah.
And that stuff doesn't tend to, unless, again, there was a traumatic thing in adulthood, just start in adulthood. Like, those beliefs about self and feeling comfortable going into those social settings starts from a really young age. And feeling like you can have a voice in that, and that relationships are important and not scary, or whatever those beliefs may be.
One of the things that I've stressed in the message, but I also picked up in research and all, is the fact that your brain does change and you're not stuck, which was new data for a lot of people. But say you were raised in an environment where you did have trauma, and your parents probably weren't the best social coaches or whatever you want to call it, and you're an adult and you want to connect and you want to take on new, I want to get better. What are some things you need to remember or know? Are there any steps you can take to kind of get better socially or connect with people, or any of that kind of thing that would be good for people to know, to understand about that brain and how they can change?
I'm kind of thinking that you operate out of what you know. So we only know what we know. So if we think about our history and how we have had relationships in the past, that will influence the way that we have the relationships now, which is what you're saying. But I'm thinking just about that part of just that will inform how we have relationships. So keep that in mind, I guess, when you're trying to form new ones, of like trying to make sure that doesn't carry over. If it's something that you want to change from what you had in the past, make sure you don't seek that out in the future. If that makes sense.
Well, I call them correctional like, it's the here and the now that's going to change the belief that everybody thinks I'm stupid if I have something to say or whatever. Like, we do have to be open to trying these things. And again, maybe that means talking with a therapist first so I can have some like coping skills when I get anxious or whatever. But we absolutely can rewire our brain. That plasticity you're talking about. I tell people all the time, like, isn't it nice to know we can rewire our brain? The older we are, the more practice it takes, because it's more set in its ways. But we can totally rewire our brain, and correctional relationships, current experiences are one of the most powerful ways we do that. We can sit and talk about it all day long and process in an office. But once we get out and try that stuff, we actually learn like, oh, I do have the interesting things to say, or people aren't just going to shut down around me. And so having the
so the process of rewiring, I guess that's what I'm after. So I could talk to you in your office, and then I've got to go to a party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It can be something as simple as, hey, maybe this week, if it is somebody that goes to church this week, maybe try to smile to 10 people. Just see what happens when you look 10 people in the eye and smile, and just see what happens. And maybe it starts that small, like, oh, people actually smile back at me. I'm not totally invisible. Or maybe it's go say hi to somebody, or that coworker you mentioned a couple times. Why don't you just try asking them about a show they watch, and realizing like, oh,
so it can be very small and,
absolutely,
and easy things, for lack of a better way of putting it. But I think that's important to know, because some people think it. For some people, it is a chasm that I've got to cross. So it might as well be 50 miles. But I can do this in inches, and that's okay. And that would do the rewiring work.
Absolutely. So and probably it's probably the safer way to go that route, because that's how we do rewire. It's slowly over time, is laying this new framework, this new foundation of correctional experiences over time. One big one may feel nice, or maybe honestly, maybe way too overwhelming to have been a good experience, even if it was overall good.
So almost like slow over time is even better in some ways. Yeah.
I kind of think about it like clearing a path. Like in our brain, our pathways are very defined usually with our experiences. So we default, it's kind of like a marble. You default and it goes into the crack that it knows. So when you're doing these corrective experiences, you're kind of creating a new path through the jungle, is what I tell people. You've got your machete and you're cutting your new pathway. So it does take some work, and I do think that slowly over time is a good thing. I had a kiddo, she's a teenager. In my head, she's a kiddo. Not that long ago, of just stretching her window of tolerance. So what she can handle, like just try one thing that's just slightly out of that window of tolerance. And for her, it was calling a friend she hadn't talked to in a while and getting out of the house. So it's like, that was her big thing. And she came in all excited. She's like, I did it. Like, so cool. See, it's small things like that it's like little, and then, we're just stretching it over time to where she can feel like she can do most things. So,
and for you guys, like when you're just saying that, like I could see the excitement you had for her.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what you guys are doing, there's a relationship there with the people you're meeting with.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's just as important as them having a relationship with you, I would assume, right? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, rapport, like 90% of what works in therapy is the rapport. If you don't feel heard or cared about or responded to by your therapist, I don't know that you're going to want to share your deep, painful, vulnerable things. So relationship is number one.
Yeah. So we spend a lot of time doing that. So like with kids, we'll play for a while just to get used to each other and playing games and those kinds of things. So, and I do that with teens too. We'll have cards or something that's going while we're talking. But I've had a girl that I've seen for a long time here recently that just had stopped, and how much that relationship, I was smiling. I was like clapping for her. I was like, I'm just so proud of you. I'm just so proud. And I kept saying that over and over again. And she's not a person that really like would smile a whole lot or would acknowledge any of that. But she's like, I'm really thankful for the time that we had together. So, like amazing. One of those, and that for me is not, we don't always get those kinds of things, but man, that just showed, we're doing something.
Yeah.
So
that's a good thing. Great. So I know they impact us, so it's good that we can impact them too.
Well, yeah, and you think if you're going to open your vulnerability up with somebody, it's got to be somebody you feel safe with. I mean, safety in relationship is one of the big key things for that relationship to be sustaining. I think if we don't feel safe with somebody, we're on guard or whatever those things may be. So if we can create a space, just even with our friends or in our office or whatever, of safety, non-judgment as much as possible, those kinds of things in our relationships, friendships, marriages, whatever, is a beautiful thing.
And kind of wrapping up here, kind of towards the end, kind of closing up, I just want to make sure we take some time and ask if someone's listening to this and they're kind of processing some of these things on their own, thinking, man, maybe that's something I want to explore what would you suggest they do? Like kind of some first steps to maybe get connected to either talking with someone or maybe something different.
I mean, definitely. I mean, people don't have to have like this big, huge life altering thing to be going on to go talk to a therapist. It's somebody that's not in the emotion with you that can give you perspective from the outside. So I definitely encourage that. But honestly, if you do have relationships in your life, people in your life that you feel safe with, maybe try opening up about something that you've kept all to yourself for a while, just to allow yourself to receive support from the people that are already in your life. Counsel at your church. I mean, there's prayer teams and those kinds of things, just to seek support in that way. Obviously, I think we're a little biased, but I think everyone could use a therapist.
I
the
wouldn't
longer
disagree.
I live, the more I agree with that statement. I can tell you. Everybody. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else you'd add to that, Jill?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Just, see what you already have. Take inventory of what you already have around you. And if you've got, helpful people that are truly have been supportive to you, like Courtney said, trying to risk, opening up about something or trying new things or, whatever that might be. But then if you need a professional, to reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
We've got a lot in our area, a lot of good ones. So
Yeah.
But it's okay to promote this one specifically.
Yeah. And how can we find you
Yeah.
guys if people are looking to find out more about you guys? How can we find you guys?
So the easiest way is probably just to go to our website, which is joyforthejourneycounseling.com. We are in Newburgh. So you can find us that way, and our phone number and everything's on there, and give us a call if you've got questions or things like that.
Yeah. And I'll put the link to your guys' website in the description of the podcast, if wherever you're listening or watching. I think one of my favorite things just in this podcast, one, is just fascinating and fun to just process this information. But I love how visual you both are. Like when you're doing hand motions and Courtney's putting her arms up against her chest, and I'm like, yeah, that makes me feel safe when I do that. Yeah, I understand
That's
that.
right.
I do.
Brain's a fist. That's locked in now.
We do body movement. I do
a
a
lot.
ton of body movement in my office. I have people stand up, and our posture is key. If I'm trying to be serious about something or I'm trying to be in a better mood, like this doesn't help. If I
That's
can,
true. That's right.
If
And then you dance around the house.
And I do dance.
She dances with her clients too.
I do,
sometimes,
and
with the little
that is a
kiddos.
fact.
Courtney, I feel like we should start dancing.
I mean, I will moonwalk / Running Man at any time.
Done. That's happening.
That's right.
And I'll see Brett. I'll walk by, knock on his door. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm dancing.
I'm dancing. That's right.
You do you. You do you.
I've been released.
Yep.
Dance break.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for taking some time and sharing some of your awesome just information, things you guys get to do. And thank you for what you do. I mean, it's awesome just to be able to get to hear a little bit of that, and why it's, I can obviously see on your faces and just hear from your stories why you love it so much. So it's awesome just being able to hear that. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Brett, as we kind of move forward in the series, I don't know, anything that you would just kind of want to be talking about? I know this one will be playing at a different time, probably when we're recording.
Well, it'll be towards the end of it. And the last subject is going to be stress, which I will be asking these two about what would be great resources, because that one I haven't delved into as much because I spent a lot of time with addictions and relationships. But we will be just giving strategies for how to overcome stress, because that's a very, very common problem. A lot of people have anxiety, and life is speeding up, and it's so crowded, and everybody talks about how busy they are and how stressed they are. So I'm hoping to come up with here's 3 things to know and understand about this when that happens. And I got some today. Remember, you put your little fist together and you look at your
Maybe
the
we'll just
emotion
show that.
inside. We may just do that. Yeah.
Show that on a
Just
Sunday
this
morning.
little animated thing. And then in the summer, speaking of music, we are going to do another summer music thing that we've done the last couple of years. We're going through the Psalms. We're going to go through the life of David and talk about worship from that angle, and how his life was kind of intertwined with music and worship and all that. So that'll be for the summer.
Can I tell people what it's called?
Yes, because I don't remember what it was called. So
That's my job, actually.
That's right.
Yeah. We're calling it soundtracks. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love that name.
yeah.
And Matt actually had a really
Soundtrack to
great
your life.
idea of getting people to submit. I don't know if we'll do this, but I'll talk about it here. Submit kind of artwork of what's the soundtrack of your life look like, and use that as the artwork for the series. So we might be throwing that out here soon, which would be great. I'd love that. Love to see that people come up with. So again, thank you, Courtney and Jill, for joining us. It's so awesome to be able to hang out, and we appreciate you guys so much listening, and appreciate you sharing, following anywhere you're listening to it today. And we thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the One Life Church podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and subscribe. That way you'll get an alert anytime there's a new episode. If there was something that you heard that you really want other people to know, share it out on social media. You can use the hashtag OLPodcast. To ask us a question here at the podcast, you can email us at podcast@onelifechurch.org. I'm one of your co-hosts, Sarah Inman, and I produced this episode. Our music is produced by Micah Robertson and Ben Brock.